Welcome back to MonsterTamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created with Phaser 3. Previously, for our cutscene and in-game events feature, we worked on adding story flags to our game. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code to this point, as well as complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. So the last thing we need to do for our cutscene and in-game events feature is we're going to add some black bars to our scene when our event starts. So when our event starts, we're going to have these black bars animate down from the top and bottom of our screens to make it look like we're viewing an in-game cutscene. Once our event is over, we'll have those bars animate off our screen, and then our player will be able to go back to playing the game. To add this functionality, we're going to place this in its own Phaser scene, so then that way we can run that scene on top of our existing world scene, and then that way we can trigger our cutscenes at any point in our game. So this is going to be very similar to how we launch our other Phaser scenes for like our inventory and for our monster party. However, one key difference is we'll keep our world scene running in the background instead of pausing it, and we're going to run both scenes at the same time. To do this, we'll want to create a brand new scene. So in our source code, under our scenes folder, let's make a new file. We're going to call this cutscene scene. So in our file, let's do export class. We'll do cutscene scene. This is going to extend our base scene. So let's add in our constructor, and now we'll do super. And now we need to provide our scene configuration. So we'll have our key, and let's do our scene keys. And now we'll need to add a new key for our scene. So we're going to call this cutscene scene. Let's jump over to our scene keys. We're going to add that in. So now we have our new Phaser scene. Let's update our game configuration. So if we come over to our main.js file, let's add in our scene. So at the bottom of our class, we'll do game scene add. Let's do our scene keys. We'll do our cutscene scene. Now let's reference our class. And now we'll save. Oh, and it looks like we have an issue. We need to fix our imports. So we'll add our .js for our imports. All right, so now for testing our changes, let's go over to our world scene. And we're going to update our scene. So after we create all of our game objects, we're going to launch our new Phaser scene. That way it's always running. So in our create method at the very bottom, after we add in our game audio, let's launch our UI scene. So we're going to do this, we'll do scene, we'll do launch, we'll do our scene keys, and now let's do our cutscene scene. All right, so if we save our changes, let's jump back over to our new scene, and let's add in our create method. All right, we'll add in our create method, and for now we're just going to do a console log just to make sure everything is connected, and we'll just say test. So now when our scene starts, we'll see our new message gets logged to our console. All right, so now in our scene, we're going to want to create game objects that are going to represent our black bars for our in-game event. So to do this, let's add two new properties to our class. For the first one, we'll do top bar, and then we'll do bottom bar. And so now down in our create method for our top and bottom bars, we're just going to use our basic rectangle shape, and we'll color them black. So for this, we're going to do this. We'll do our top bar. We're going to set equal to this.add.rectangle. For our position, we're going to do our top left corner, so we're going to do 0, 0. Now we're going to use the full width of our scenes. We're going to do this.scale.width. And we want this to be 100 pixels tall. And now for the color black, we'll do 0x, 00, 00, 00. And we're going to make this have a little bit of transparency, so we'll do 0.8 instead of 1. Finally, for our game object, let's update our origin to be 0 since in the top left corner. And we're going to do set visible. And we're going to set it to be true for the time being so we can test our changes. But then we'll come back and set that to false. So let's copy this, we'll paste it. Now let's do our bottom bar. Now for our bottom bar, we want this to be at the bottom of our screen. So we're going to do this.scale.height, and we want to subtract 100, so we come up a little bit from the bottom, and then we still want it to be 100 pixels, and we use the same settings. For us to be able to actually see our changes, we need to bring our scene to the top of our rendering order. So we'll do this.scene, and we'll do bring to top. So now it's going to be at the top of our display list, and now we should see our black bars on top of our world scene. So now that we've created our black bars, now we need to create our animation for having these appear onto our screen and then disappear. To do this, we'll create two new methods for our class. And so we're going to do async, let's do start cutscene, and then let's copy that and we'll do end cutscene. So when we start our cutscene for our top bar here, we want it to be outside of our current view area, and it's going to animate down onto our screen. For the bottom bar, it'll be below our current view in our world scene, and it's going to slide up. So to create this animation, first let's update the position of our game objects. So we'll do this.topbar, we're going to do set Y, and we'll do -100, so that way it's outside our current view. And we'll do set visible, and we want this to be true. Now we're going to do the same thing for our bottom bar. So let's copy and paste that. We'll update our property reference, instead of doing -100, we want to do this dot scale dot height. And that way it's positioned right at the bottom of our world scene, and we want this to be visible. And so now we need to create our animations. For this, let's add a new method. We're going to call this animate bar. So in this method, and so for animation, we're going to use a tween. And so for our tween, we're going to need to know what our target game object is. We'll want to know what our start Y value is. And then we'll want to know our ending Y value. All right, so now to create our tween, we're going to do this.tweens.add. Now for our configuration, we'll do our targets. We'll do our target argument. For our delay, we'll do 0 milliseconds. For our duration, we're going to do 800 milliseconds. And for our Y value, now we're going to use from, and we'll do our start Y. Our start will also be our start Y. Then finally for our 2, this will be our end Y. All right, and then we just need to add on complete. So then that way we can have our callback for once our tween animation is finished. All right, so now for animation, we're going to want our start cutscene and our end cutscene methods to end only after our animation is completed for both of our game objects. To do this, we can wrap our tween creation within a promise, and only after our tween is finished, we can then wait for that promise to resolve. To do that, let's do return. We'll do new promise. So now we'll add in our resolve argument. And now in our callback here, we're going to place our tween configuration inside there. And now for onComplete, let's get rid of our callback, and we're just going to pass in resolve. So now that we're returning a promise here, we can come back up to start cutscene, and let's do await. We'll do promise all. And now we can provide an array of promises. And so we'll do this, we'll do our animate bar, and let's do our top bar first. And then for our starting position, we'll do -100, and we want to end up at position 0. Now we do the same thing for our bottom bar, so let's copy that. We'll paste it. We'll update our references. We'll do bottom bar. And now for our position, we're going to want to end up in this.scale.height for our scene. And then we want to end up in this.scale.height -100 to put us in the position we want to be in. So if we want to test our changes, let's come up to our create method and let's make our game objects not visible by default. And then after we do create, let's call our start cutscene method. And now we should see our black bars animate onto our scene. Very nice. All right, so now we just need to add in the logic for our end cutscene method. So for our ending cutscene, we're going to expect this to be called after we've started our cutscene. So our black bars are already on our scene, and now we just want to animate them off our scene. So let's copy our promise all here. All right, so now for our positions, we just want to flip these. And so we want to end at -100, and we're going to start at 0. And then we want to end at this.scale.height and start at this.scale.height -100. After we finish our animations, we'll just want to make our game objects not visible in our scene. So we're just going to copy these lines of code here. Let's paste them. We can get rid of our set Y, and we'll just call set visible. Now let's update this to be false. All right, so now if we want to test our changes, let's come up to our create method. Let's do async on our create method. And now we can await our start cutscene, and let's do await this.end cutscene. So now when our scene starts, our black bars will animate onto our scene, and then right away, because we're not waiting, we animate them back off our scene. All right, so since we verify our code, let's clean these 2 lines of code up from our create method, and we'll get rid of our async from our create method. All right, so now we have our animations in place, and we verify they work. Now we need to connect this logic to our world scene. So if we jump over to our world scene class, let's go to our start cutscene method. All right, so to reference our other scene, we need to use our scene manager. So let's do await. We're going to do this. We're going to do scene to reference our scene manager. Now we'll use the get method, which will allow us to provide a key of one of our scenes, and then we'll be able to retrieve that scene instance from our scene manager. So we're going to do scene keys. Let's do our cutscene scene. And so now we'll want to call our start cutscene method on our scene instance. All right, so now we need to do the same thing for when we want to end our cutscene. So let's copy this line of code here. We're going to come down to our handle cutscene interaction. Currently we have a to-do for when we want to end our cutscene. So let's get rid of the to-do. We'll do await this scene.get. We're going to grab our cutscene again. And now instead of calling start cutscene, we're going to call end cutscene. So now with our changes, if we come back to our browser, let's move our player down. We should now see our black bars animate before our mom NPC shows up. And now our dialogue shows up, and so now we have a bug we need to fix here. but let's just make sure our code's working for ending our cutscene. So if we finish our dialogue, our cutscene bars should go away. Nice. And just to make sure it's working with our professor, let's go up there. We'll trigger our cutscene, our black bars reappear, our professor shows up, talks to us, and then they should disappear once we finish our events. Very nice. Now, to address our issue with our dialogue modal no longer being visible to our player, we need to update how it's being rendered out in our phaser game. Currently, this game object is part of our world scene, and now that we have this cutscene scene and our black bars are being rendered in that scene, we need a way to have this game object be visible on top of those other game objects without it interfering with our world scene. To do that, we're going to move all of our logic tied to our dialogue modal to its own separate scene, and then that way we can control the rendering order based on our phaser scenes and when we display them. To do this, let's make a new scene file. So if we come under our scenes folder, let's do a new file. We're going to call this dialogue scene. I'm going to open up our cutscene scene file. I'm going to copy all the logic there. I'm going to paste it over to our dialogue scene. Now I'm just going to get rid of our methods that are tied to our cutscene. And let's update our class name. And so we'll do dialogue scene. This is going to extend our base scene. We can get rid of our properties here for our black bars. And then we'll get rid of those properties here from our create method. So now we'll want to add a new property to our scene keys. And so we're just going to call this dialogue scene. Let's copy that and go into our scene keys. We'll add that in. So now let's update our game configuration to have our new scene. So if we open up our main.js file, let's add in our new scene. So we'll copy that line of code here. Let's do our dialogue scene, and we'll reference our dialogue scene class. Let's save. Now if we come back to our world scene, let's come up to our create method where we'll start our scenes, and let's start our dialogue scene. So let's copy this line of code here. And so for our new scene, we're going to launch this after our cutscene scene, so then that way it's on top of it in our rendering order. We'll do our scene keys, and we'll do our dialogue scene. So now let's jump back to our class. Alright, so for our dialogue scene class, we're going to update our class to have all of the same methods and properties that we currently have in our Dialog UI class. And then that way in our world scene, instead of creating an instance of this class, we're just going to reference our dialogue scene and the same methods to invoke the same code. To do this, let's start copying some of our code over. So we'll start off with our UI text style. Let's paste that at the top of our class. So now for our properties on our Dialog UI, let's copy all those. We'll paste them over into our dialogue scene. So we'll add those to our class. We can get rid of our reference to our phaser scene since we're in a phaser scene already. Next, let's add in our getters and our methods. So we'll copy our getters first. We'll paste those into our class. Next, let's copy all the methods on our class. So we'll grab all our public and private methods. We'll copy those. Let's paste them over into our class. We'll paste those below our create method. All right, now let's go ahead and grab our imports. Come over to our dialog scene. We'll import those in. We're going to move our phaser import to the top of our class. Now let's go ahead and save. And now we just need to update our references in our code. So instead of doing this.scene, we're just going to do this.cameras. For animating our text, we'll do this. And now if we come down, we'll do this.add. And we'll do this.add. Now let's save. And so one last thing we need to do is now we need to take our code from our constructor from our Dialog UI class and migrate this over to our create method. So let's copy all of this code here. We're going to come over to our dialog scene. Let's go down to our create method. And so before we call this scene bring to top, let's paste in our code. We can get rid of our scene reference. And now for our width, we're just going to update this to be 1280. Let's get rid of our reference to our scene. And now let's save. All right, so now if we want to test our changes, let's jump back over to our world scene. And instead of creating instances of our Dialog UI, we now want our Dialog UI to reference our new phaser scene. So in our create method where we create a Dialog UI, let's grab that code here. We're going to remove it. Let's come down to where we start our phaser scenes. We're going to go ahead and paste that in. Let's get rid of our comment, and we'll do this Dialog UI is going to be equal to, we want to grab our scene from our scene managers. We'll do this, we'll do our scene. We'll do get, and now we want to do our scene keys, and let's grab our dialog scene. And now we just want to update our type up in our properties. So if we come up to the top of our class, so when we have our dialog UI, we're going to change that to reference our dialog scene. All right, so real quick, we'll fix our IntelliSense. So we're going to wrap this in parentheses. So now we'll do @type, and for our type, this is going to be our dialog scene. So now we update our references, we should be able to test. So if we come into our game, let's move our character down. Our cutscene should appear, our NPC shows up, and now we show our dialogue modal, but now our sizing is messed up. And so what's happening here is in our world scene, we currently modified our camera zoom property, and that makes our objects appear smaller than they currently are because we zoom out in our game. If we want the same effect where we have our dialogue modal where it was before, we'll also need to do that in our dialogue scene. So we jump over to our dialogue scene. After we do our messages to show property, let's reference our cameras. We're going to do our main camera. Let's do set zoom, and we'll do 0.8 so that way we match our world scene. So now back in our game, if we move our player down again, let's trigger our cutscene. We're going to see now our dialogue modal shows up and it looks just like it did before. And if we press our space key, we can see that our input is still being processed for it properly from our world scene. All right, and so once we're done with our dialogue, it disappears. Let's do a few more tests. Let's talk to our other NPC over here and make sure everything still works there. All right, so we see our dialogue modal shows up and we're able to talk to our NPC. Nice. So now we've tested our updates to our dialogue modal, we can go ahead and clean up our Dialog UI class. So if we come into our code, let's delete our Dialog UI file, and we'll go ahead and save. And now at the top of our class, we just need to update our reference. So let's remove our Dialog UI from our imports. We'll save our game. Our game should restart. If we do a quick test, we should see our NPC shows up, and we should see our dialogue modal show up in our game. Alright, so with that last change, that actually brings an end to this video, and that wraps up our cutscene in-game events feature. So as a reminder, there is a link in the description of the video to complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in this series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please follow the links on your screen now.